Welcome to The Flow, hosted by Bob Martin, slightly edgy glimpses into politics, culture, society, and being human.
I want to start today by tipping my hat. Every morning, a historian named Heather Cox Richardson publishes a piece she calls Letters from an American. And if you don't read her, you really should. She's one of the clearest, most honest chroniclers of American political history working today, and she does it every single day. With precision, with context, and without flinching. This morning, she wrote about the beginning of the Civil War, the first shots at Fort Sumter, the bravado, the underestimating, the stunning shared assumption on both sides that this would be quick and manageable and clean. She laid out the history and let it speak. She let it speak to today, and it spoke to me loudly. So what you're about to hear is not a summary of her piece. I want you to read that yourself, and I'll point you towards it. What follows here is where her history took my thinking. So here is Brought Lunch to Bull Run. It's April 1861. The first major land battle of the Civil War is about to happen near a little creek in Virginia called Bull Run, and people, actual civilians, actual Washington residents, have packed picnic baskets and loaded into carriages and driven out from the Capitol to watch the battle. That's not a metaphor. It literally happened. Senators, socialites, reporters, spectators with opera glasses settling in on the hillsides with their sandwiches, waiting for the show. One Southern newspaper had already predicted the whole thing would cost no more than, and I want you to hear this phrase, they said it would cost no more than a thimble full of blood. Mary Chestnut, a Southern diarist, had written that she would willingly drink all the blood spilled in this war. She was not worried about the quantity. It wouldn't be much. Both sides expected the other to collapse quickly. Both sides expected an easy, decisive, almost theatrical victory. The war would be brief. The point would be made. Everyone could go home. And then the battle started. And the Union lines broke. And the Confederate forces pushed hard. And suddenly the soldiers were retreating, and then they weren't retreating, they were running, and the running turned into a rout, and the rout spilled off the battlefield and onto the road back to Washington, right through the picnic. The senators and the socialites and the spectators with their opera glasses scrambled back into their carriages and fled. The road to Washington became a chaos of soldiers and civilians tangled together, all of them running from the thing they had come to watch as entertainment. They had brought lunch to a catastrophe. Now, before I go any further, I need to stop for a moment and address something. Because, the easy response to where this is heading is to say, well, both sides are extreme, both sides have radicals, both sides contributed to the mess. And that reflexive both sides framing is itself kind of one of the intellectual failures of the current moment, and it deserves its own full conversation. We're going to have that one soon. But for right now, I'll just say this. Not all radicalism is equal. The radicalism of 1861 was not symmetrical. One side was fighting to dissolve a nation in order to preserve human slavery. The other side was fighting to hold that nation together. Extreme and wrong-headed decisions were made on both sides, but what they were fighting about was not equivalent. It never is. More on that another day. Stay tuned. What I want to talk about today is the thing that both sides shared, the thing that is not uniquely Confederate or uniquely Union, the thing that is not uniquely Republican or uniquely Democratic, not uniquely 1861 or uniquely 2026. It is a very old, very American habit. The failure of imagination. The inability or maybe the refusal to truly picture what happens next. The Atlanta newspaper could not picture what a thimbleful of blood would actually become. Mary Chestnut could not picture what she was actually vowing to drink. The picnickers could not picture the soldiers running past their carriages. The Southern secessionists could not picture Appomattox. The Union commanders could not picture 4 years of slaughter. They saw what was in front of them, and they could not make themselves see what was coming. And we've done this more than once. The 9/11 Commission, looking back at the intelligence failures that allowed those attacks to happen, used a specific phrase to describe what went wrong. They called it a failure of imagination. The evidence was there. The warnings were there. What was missing was the willingness to genuinely picture the scenario playing out. It felt too large, too dramatic, too unlikely until it wasn't. And right now, today, we are watching something that should be easily imaginable because unlike those previous failures, this one is happening slowly and in public and with considerable advance notice, and we are still struggling to picture it. The executive branch is systematically dismantling the checks on its own power. The courts are being pressured, ignored, and in some cases defied and ignored. Congress has largely stood aside. The rule of law, which is not a slogan, but an actual operating system, the thing that makes it possible for elections to mean anything and for courts to have authority and for rights to be more than suggestions, is under deliberate, sustained, coordinated attack, and a lot of us are watching it the way those picnickers watched Bull Run, from a comfortable distance, with the background hum of, oh, it probably won't come to that, waiting for someone to blink. In his second inaugural address, Abraham Lincoln looked back at how the war had begun. He described how both sides had underestimated, how both sides had failed to imagine the magnitude of what they were setting loose. He said, and let's just sit with this, he said, neither party expected for the war the magnitude or the duration which it has already attained. Each looked for an easier triumph and a result less fundamental and astounding. And then he wrote 3 words that I think are among the most quietly devastating in American political history. He had just described the failure of imagination, the miscalculation, the bravado, the certainty that it wouldn't really come to that. And then he wrote, and the war came. Not the war broke out, not war became unavoidable, not hostilities escalated, and the war came like a tide, like something that moves according to its own logic when you stand on the shore, assuring each other it won't reach this far. The question I'm sitting with today, the one I think you may be sitting with too, even if you haven't named it yet, is not whether there is danger. Hey, that debate is over. The question is whether we can do something those picnickers could not do. Whether we can actually let ourselves imagine, honestly, fully, without flinching, what it looks like when the thing you decided was a political spectacle becomes the ground shaking beneath your feet because they had the best seats in the house and the carriages didn't protect them. The opera glasses didn't help. And the war came anyway. I'm Bob Martin, and this is The Flow.